Hello, welcome to this virtual event that we're having today with Claire Zalc, who's joining us from Paris to talk about her book, Denaturalized, How Thousands Lost Their Citizenship and Lives in Vichy France, which has just come out in English translation. We're sorry that you can't be with us in person, Claire, but so pleased that you can join us remotely from France. The discussion today will be chaired by Emmanuelle Saada, my wonderful colleague in the Department of French and History. She's going to be giving Claire a proper presentation, introduction in just a moment. And then we'll have a commentary as well by Rebecca Kobrin, who will be introduced by Emmanuelle briefly as well. I want to thank our co-sponsors of this event today. In addition to the Maison Française, it's being presented by the Institute of Israel and Jewish Studies, the Department of History, IRCPL, and the Alliance Program. And I want to thank all of the sponsors of the Maison Française, and notably the Knapp Family Foundation and Charlie Knapp, who is a board member, for their support for this event. There will be a Q&A at the end. The event is going to, discussion will last an hour, and we'll save 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have a question at any time during the presentation, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom. And we'll make time for questions. We're pleased that so many of you could join us today, so welcome. And I turn over to Emmanuelle Saada.
Thank you, Shani. There is actually someone mowing the lawn in front of the window. I don't know if you can hear this. If you can't, that's very good. I am personally thrilled to be able to welcome today Claire Zalc, and her book. Claire has been a friend for many, many years, and I've been following her work with great admiration and interest, like a lot of historians of France, but also historian of the Jews beyond France in general. I'm going to very briefly introduce Claire and Rebecca for the sake of time. Then Claire will introduce her work, present her work, and the major, methodological and analytical points of her work. Then Rebecca will make a few comments, and then I will intervene maybe to wrap up with one or two comments and a question. I think given the number of people who are participating today, the interest in this topic, I think it is best to leave as much time as possible for the Q&A. So Claire, welcome back to Columbia. For those who don't know, Claire actually has taught in the French department at Columbia about 25 years ago, maybe, when she was a student at the École normale supérieure. She was in the French department, and since then she has changed statuses many times. She is currently a research director at the CNRS in Paris and a professor at the École des hautes études en sciences sociales. And she's the recipient of one of the most prestigious research prizes in France, the Médaille de Bronze, the bronze medal of the CNRS. She has written on topics as various as immigration, the history of persecution, Jews, business and credit. And she's the author of numerous books. Her first book was Melting Shops, une histoire des commerçants étrangers en France. It was about small shopkeepers, foreign shopkeepers in France. It was published in 2010 and won in 2012 the André Conquet Prize for this book. And then in 2010, she also published in collaboration with Nicolas Mario a very important book called Face à la persécution, 1991 Jews, Facing Persecution, 1991 Jews in the war. I'm translating here for the French, and it was a fascinating study of what happened to 991 Jews in a small town called Lens in the north of France. What happened to all these people during the war. She also is the author of a book called actually a very important book that I advise my students to read, so much so that the last student, if the student is here today, please bring me back the book. The last student kept the book for herself. It's a book about quantitative methods for the humanities. It was published in French in 2008 and translated by Virginia University Press in 2019. I should have all the books here. Only the books on quantitative method was stolen by this student. But the one book I wanted to show, I think Shani did that already, is Denaturalized, how thousands lost their citizenship and lives in Vichy, France. This was published in 2017, 18, I forgot, in France, and was just translated by Harvard University Press. But this book won the 2017 prize for the history of justice in France. To respond, to comment on the book, we have the privilege of having today my other friend, more recent but no less deep friend, Rebecca Kobrin, who is the the Russell and Bettina Knapp Associate Professor of American Jewish History at Columbia University. And she is, since this year, the co-director of the Columbia's Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies. Like Claire, actually, there are lots of overlap in their interests. Like Claire, she works in the field of immigration history, urban studies, and Jewish history. And she is specializing in Jewish migration. Like Claire, she has published several books. One very important book called Jewish Bialystok and its Diaspora, published in 2010, also received the Jordan Schnitzler Prize for Best Book in Modern Jewish History concerning the Americas, that was awarded in 2012. And she just finished a book called A Credit to the Nation, European Immigrant Bankers and American Finance, 1870-1930, that is going to be published by Harvard University Press in 2021. Another thing that you need to know about Rebecca, she is an amazing teacher. She received the Landfest Prize for teaching, and she is also a a public intellectual. She writes a lot in public venues like the Washington Post, CNN, The Guardian, and Bloomberg News. So thank you very much for Rebecca for commenting on Claire's amazing, wonderful book, and most of all, thank you, Claire, for being with us today and presenting your book to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank, of course, Shani Pierre and Emmanuelle Catan for the organization of the event. And Emmanuelle, thank you so much for your introduction, and Rebecca for participating in the conversation today. I feel very honored to hear your comments on my work. And to begin, I prepared a PowerPoint. I hope it's going to work. So I will try to share my screen, and please tell me if it's okay. Do you see my screen or not? Okay, great. So 5 years ago, exactly, we commemorated the event in Paris last week. In the wake of the 2015 terrorist attacks, French President François Hollande proposed to include deprivation of nationality in the French Constitution. This led to a huge controversy, which has continually positioned itself in relation to the Vichy precedent. My book addresses the episode of denaturalization. Oh, yes, it's working. Do you see the second slide now? Okay. So the episode conducted under Vichy between 1940 and 1944. It was lodged by the Vichy regime during its first days of existence. The law was promulgated just 12 days after Marshal Pétain came to power. And the review of naturalization has been a top priority, and you can read here the speech broadcast of Marshal Pétain in the radio, saying the review of naturalization in the first at the step of his sentence. So it has been a top priority and a centerpiece of the new French state's policy. There are reminders that certain well-known figures were the victims of this policy, including the families of the singer Serge Gainsbourg and Jacques Derrida, that you may know, along with Marc Chagall and his wife. Yet, at the end of the day, we know little about these naturalizations. Why is this so? First, there is the silence of the law. I am reproducing here the integrality of the text, issued on July 22, 1944. It is short, simple, it's quite rare to be able to reproduce a law in one slide. And above all, as you can see, it is totally silent regarding the criteria that were supposed to guide decisions. The only thing the text said is that a review of all denaturalizations granted from 1927 will be conducted. Why 1927? the date was not chosen at random. It referred to the 1927 law, considered the most liberal law in the history of French nationality, because it lowered the residency requirement in France to 3 years instead of the 10-year period established in 1889. But after having read this law, the mystery at the origin of my investigation remains. Who are the bad citizens of the Vichy regime? No target is mentioned, no crime, no orphans are mentioned.
Claire, can I say something? Could
Yes,
you switch to the side view, to the slideshow view, so that we can see the slides in
okay, let me see if I can do that. I am...
Maybe Fanny or Shani can help you. I mean, can say what is supposed to be done, because
yeah, you can switch to slideshow view so that we can see one slide at a time.
Okay, so let me see if I can do that.
I think you have to click the button, right?
Voilà, c'est très bien.
Is this better?
Yep, perfect.
So the second difficulty, the first is the silence of the law. The second is that the Commission on the Review of Naturalization, which was the institution established to carry out the policy, left no archives. In my opinion, one main reason for this is this man that you can see here, André Mornay. As you can see here, he's best known for being appointed by General de Gaulle as prosecutor in the post-war purge trials of judges who were accused of collaboration. And he oversaw the Laval and here the Pétain trials at the Haute Cour de Justice. But this same man served as the vice president of the Commission on the review of naturalization from 1940 till 1944. One can surmise that he didn't want to leave traces of his own activity as a member of the Commission. Yet, traces have survived. They are in the individual files themselves. That is why I will begin this talk by showing you the basic material of the daily work of the reviewers of the Commission. I choose a special file, the Bienenfels, the Georges Perec's families. Georges Perec, you can see him in New York. That's a special dédicace because I really like to be with you today and not in my home in lockdown in Paris, but anyway. So Georges Perec, a French novelist that you may know. His uncle, his aunt, and their 2 daughters request nationality in 1927 and obtained it. 13 years later, in December 1994, their file was reopened and examined by the Commission. Each naturalization files include this kind of slip that you can see, like this one, attached to the cover that indicates the Commission's decision: maintien, retrait, maintain, withdrawals, and sometimes inquiry. As you can read, if you understand French, the reviewer recommends here a retrait, withdrawal, for the entire family. And the reason is indicated: Israelite, not in national interest, Israélite, pas d'intérêt national. Consequently, the whole family was denaturalized in March 1941. They lost the French citizenship they had acquired 13 years before. In this same file, the whole family, you can observe that the family reacted. David, the father, opposed the decision shortly after the decree. In this letter, he wrote using the pronoun he to refer to himself instead of I, and that is quite funny. And he said that the measure has thrust him into a state of great consternation, I'm quoting, and he tried to emphasize his French qualities, including that he, I quote, always personally behaved in a correct manner and as a good citizen. He says something about his wife. She served during the war as a nurse and lost her brother, André Perec, the father of Georges, who gave his life and was killed on duty on June 1940. And yet this appeal was rejected, except for Branca, that you can see her here. the eldest daughter. You can see her with her friend. I don't know if you can recognize her, but it's Simone de Beauvoir, and they were very close friends. Bianca was married to a Frenchman, and for her, the decree was repealed in June 1941. She's the only one in the family who recovered her French citizenship, thanks to the protest letter. Why her and not the others? This leads to one of the main questions raised by this book. How did one choose who is a good and who is a bad citizen? To answer it, the task is not easy because the traces that you saw left in the files collectively represent enormous archives, as the Commission opened 250,000 to 300,000 files from September 1940 to August 1944. This is where my appetite for numbers can be a good thing, and thank you, Emmanuelle, for having mentioned this book that I liked a lot. Let me reassure you, I did not open all the files, the 250,000 files. I'm only human. Instead, I selected and examined a sample of 1,000 files, and I immersed myself in the inner working of administrative practices to conduct a kind of archival ethnography of the traces left by the procedures. I attempted to carry out a quantified ethnography. This method allows me to investigate how the Vichy regime concretely distinguished between good and bad citizens. The first criterion is relative to the Jews. The annotation Israélite pas d'intérêt national was put on the Bienenfeld file, as you saw, and on Abramovich one reads the comment, médecin israélite roumain. I don't know if you can see it here, if you see my mouse. Yet, what is very interesting here is that this file was examined on September 28th, as you can see here, the date, 1940, before the Vichy regime adopted the first statute on Jews on October 3rd, 1940. The Commission established the objective of denaturalizing Jews as a priority before the statute was enacted, and without any written instruction to do so. How did they work? It is important to recall for everyone that because of secularism, the French Republican administration ignored Jewish identity. Religion is not in the Republic's record, and neither religious nor racial belonging appeared in the files. This is still the case today. So, how did they work? The reviewers came up with an onomastic solution. They identified Jews by means of first and last names. And it is important to note once again that this anti-Semitic identification preceded the implementation of anti-Semitic legislation and its definitions of Jews. It was not imposed by German authorities. One can observe the gradual and concrete transformation of onomastic anti-Semitism into bureaucratic routine. And sometimes attributions could be questioned. The Abraham family of Grenoble that you can see here was denaturalized in 1942, most likely because of the sound of their name, which was similar to Abraham. The family was of Italian origin, and no element suggested they should be designated as Jewish. The daughter of the family, Maria, wrote a letter of complaint to the prefecture, indicating she was stupefied by the decision. And the decision even appeared to be incomprehensible for the agent at the Grenoble prefecture. Like you can see, he added the comment, raison, motif ignoré, reasons unknown. He does not understand what's going on with this denaturalization. And that is also important because one of the results of my survey is to show the various interpretation of the criteria from one place to another, from one administration to another. I mean, in Grenoble, they don't understand why in Paris, in the Commission, they denaturalized this Abraham family. The power is to decide is not easy to wield, as reviewers sometimes hesitated. Look at this small sheet of paper. The reviewer hesitated. He wrote the name of the individual, Ashkenazi, as you can see. That the name sounds Jewish, Ashkenazi. But with the previous citizenship, Turkey, he asking himself and added Israel, and you saw that he's not sure that he's Israelite with this point. And then he asked for a renseignements généraux et militaires, meaning inquiry. This is a crucial point. One should bear in mind that behind the big word of administration, there are also individuals. And individuals here who have substantial power. This leads me to discuss when and how violence plays out in ordinary power relations. The acts observed were in no way extraordinary. Opening, examining a file, scribbling a word. Those bureaucrats were no murderer, no executioner, nor heroes, but on the other side, at stake were the fate of countless individuals. This brings me to the next point of this presentation, the question of the connection between denaturalization and the implementation of the Holocaust in France. There is, as you may know, a heated debate in France. Some columnists have been arguing that Vichy regime's intent was to protect French Jews. Following Bob Paxton, I evidence how this is absolutely not the case. Denaturalizations played a crucial role in identifying naturalized Jews. For over 5 years, they exposed them to police scrutiny and inquiries. You have to know that notification of the loss of nationality had to be given in person. Jews were called to the police station, and you can imagine the potential consequences of this kind of notification. The chronology of events were very often swift, as this example shows. Loss of nationality on March the 20th, 1942. On April 1929, as you can see here, Moïse Abramovich was transferred to the occupied authorities. So just 1 month after he's arrested. Interned in Drancy camp and deported in June, like you can see here, 23rd June 1942, deported to Auschwitz. Moreover, denaturalization deprived those Jews of the relative protection offered by French citizenship. And in this sense, this policy actively contributed to Vichy regime's implementation of the Holocaust in France. In this book, I address the issue of the meaning of citizenship by looking at the trajectories of the individuals after losing their citizenship. As we saw, they were called in the police to be notified of the decision, and as part of this humiliating ceremony, they had to hand back their ID documents. I found many of them in the archives, including this one. This person lost her job as a teacher. As many civil servants and municipal employees, jobs were reserved for national citizens. Veterans lost their pensions, and there were many of them who had served in the French army during the campaign of 1940. At this point, one is able to realize what nationality concretely represented. It was a matter of status, political and national, but also economic and symbolic. The denaturalized, as we saw with David Genenfeld, reacted when confronted with such serious difficulties. 30 of them wrote a protest letter as Jean Alberto. So I put quotation from this letter. And as you can see, these letters are fascinating and moving material. They bring to light a variety of ways of protesting and of claiming affiliation with the nation. They attest to how people internalize the definitions of what a good French person is under Vichy regime. One can observe what I call a grammar of Frenchness, in which they express the virtues that were expected. how does this story end? If I don't know, Emmanuelle, if I have 1 minute just to go through this end, one can distinguish three ends. First, the May 24, 1944 ordinance by the French Committee for the National Liberation in Algiers repealed the law of July 22, 1940. It repealed it. So that was never simple nor easy because it was a major debate within Free France, but I won't elaborate on that and I can come back on this if you are interested in. The second end of the story could be dated on August 18, 1944. That is the last date on which the Commission met and worked. So after the repealing of the law, until the very last days of the war, just 1 week before the liberation of Paris, the reviewers continued to review, to open the files, to work, and to sometimes revoke naturalization. The third ending date is less precise but more surprising. The story actually continued after the liberation, despite the law was repealed. And that is why I show you these documents. All of the files of those who were denaturalized were again reviewed by the Ministry of Justice. You can see here, it's November 1944, to determine if revocation proceedings were deemed necessary. On the individual scale, finally, the end of the story did not yet mean formal notification. They were not informed, simply because the law was repealed. Nobody returned their papers. In the files, one often finds letters bearing such questions. In the end, I am French or not? And those letters are sometimes dated in the 80s, not, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and so on. To conclude, the story shows what nationality concretely represented for people by studying the situation of those who lost it, sometimes for a while and sometimes forever. The issue is very topical. I will elaborate on the denaturalization under Trump administration because I know and I hope that's a past story. But the increasing practice depriving people of their nationality leads to question our modern definition of citizenship. And I will be happy to discuss that and to hear your comments and questions. So I will quit my screen so we can see us.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was a wonderful synthetic presentation of a very rich book. Rebecca, if you could.
Yes. So I just want to thank Emmanuelle for inviting me. I actually work for Emmanuelle as I also teach in the core. And I would say that my comments today, Claire, this is a wonderful book. And I'm going to talk from the vantage point of Jewish history. But I want to say that I've been thinking about two things. First, about this whole concept of justice. And second, about Jewish history as a discipline, because this is a book that uses Jews as a subject, but it is truly about the state, the modern European state, and in specific, the administrative state, and its arbitrariness, inconsistencies, and in the end, its violence. But Claire ended with this beautiful little tantalizing nugget about the Trump administration. And I want to just say, I am also a fan of Claire because she is a detective, not just a historian. And someone out there, this is going to be the first call because the history of what took place in the last 4 years, I'm sure will be buried and lost in a similar way. And thinking about, and this is in many ways, this book is really a model of microhistory, of how you use the voices of people who are literally lost and how you reclaim them in a way that you hear their voices, but they really speak to a much larger topic. And I would say that, the one other time I interacted with Claire in New York, she's one of the few people who interacts with Glee at searching on ancestry.com and figuring out how to use records. Most people don't react with Glee, but I'm just thinking about how she really pieced together and reconstructed the commission for the review of naturalization which I would say was intentionally, the history of it was lost because of the André Mornay, I'm going to mispronounce his name, and thinking about the histories that get lost and how when we reconstruct them, that is in many ways what the historian tries to do and the ultimate payoff. So that is one thing, thinking methodologically. And as I said, the book is a methodological tour de force. People who want to think about lost histories and how to reclaim them and where to look for them, it's a way to read. But from the vantage point of Jewish history, so at Columbia this year is the 90th anniversary that the field of Jewish history was born when Salo Baron arrived in 1930. And originally he was supposed to be put in the, well, there was argument because Columbia wanted to put him in the religion department, but he said, I am a historian. And it is important to understand the history of the Jews, not just to understand Jews, but to understand the communities around them. And in essence, that he would have loved this book. That's all I want to say, because this book uses Jews to think about the state. And I understand in France, the state in Vichy France, how it relates to the Third Republic, how it relates to the state afterwards. But this book talks about how the administrative state shapes lives. And indeed, I'm going to just focus, and I don't want to take up time because I know there's a lot of people here, but what I would say comes out most eloquently, and the book is filled with letters from people who are flabbergasted, puzzled why they are being denaturalized. And it is clear as you make that it is a name game being played by those in this administrative office. So the two groups that I say are brought to life in this book is both the administrators in this commission and the Jews whose citizenship is taken away, and they protest. And that is where the eloquence of their voices are heard. But what comes out is that the state is very violent. And more importantly, and this is the question I just want to ask you, is there so much historiography on the violence against civilians in World War II? But rarely do we think of bureaucratic administrators who, with the flick of a pen, rendered most of the people in your book, right, stateless, which ultimately doomed them to deportation and death. So my question to you is just thinking about how your book complicates this much larger literature, which when I read, I thinking of Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men, who, you know, takes a similar group of records and basically makes the argument that these men who are actually literally pulling the trigger are ordinary people like you and I in extreme circumstances. And he tries to understand their different motivations. So when I was reading first about André Mornay, but you also have a beautiful quote, which I'm just going to read. It's just 2 lines about Judge Villandant, who you make it very clear he's making decisions, and you're looking at it, and she showed us how she looks at the hidden text in the marginal notes, all those little notes. The penciled markings also reveal the persistence of racial stigmatizations, oblivious to the risks facing persons denaturalized, and the deafness in the face of the latter's pleas. Closing one's eyes and ears and carrying out the procedures to the end without taking appeals into account, continuing to denaturalize the wives and children of deportees, showing no concern for the consequences of one's actions because they appear to be so ordinary. The present inquiry also unveiled the variety of possible forms of collaboration and the deadly effects of bureaucratic blindness. So I end with that because I think in some ways this really speaks to the larger debates, not just in French history, but in how we think about these individuals. Are they collaborators? Are they perpetrators? Are they doing this to survive in Vichy France? Are they anti-Semitic? Are they against the one argument you say is they're against the Third Republic, anti-Third Republic? But how you think we should think about them, because it's not just them. And it brings into question the larger thing that I started about. This is about the administrative state and how the administrative state operates, and whether in many ways, this is now saying, going back to Hannah Arendt in some ways, and saying that the administrative state made possible the final solution. So I want you just to think about the people, not the people who are denaturalized, who I think you really bring them to life in a beautiful way, and their letters are poignant. But thinking of the people on the commission and how they fit into these larger debates about how we think about the Holocaust, not apart from European history, but part of European history, and whether it's part of the European state that we have to be thinking about, and how the individuals you looked at, how you would think of thinking about them and teaching them in a course on the Holocaust. So thank you. It was a great book. And now I am done.
Thank you. Should I answer that, or should I wait for your comments, Emmanuelle?
I think if you don't mind, for the sake of time, I think I'm going to ask just a few questions, and then because maybe they can intersect to some extent Rebecca's question too. We spoke a little when we prepared for this session, and Rebecca was told me to do the Jewish history side of this, and I would do the French history side of it, a division of labor that I actually object a little to, but that's fine. But there are I think connections that you may want to address. So basically, I had 3 questions. Again, this is an amazing book. I think what is amazing is I mean, obviously the really important story tells the inquiry into something that was actually erased from French history and historiography, but also because of the methodological contribution of thinking about, and in a way that's what Rebecca was mentioning, right? It was interesting, Rebecca, you called this a micro history, but to some extent it is a macro history, right? Because you're looking at, a huge quantity of files, right? So you're not following one individual, you're following a lot of individuals without actually erasing their individuality, which is maybe the most, fascinating for me, one of the most fascinating contributions of the book. But my 3 questions, in a way, also there to kind of maybe open the debate afterwards with the very numerous audience. First of all, first question that is related to the French side of your story is something you mentioned, but very quickly, and I think it's really worth deepening a little, and that is the question of the continuity. On one hand, between the Third Republic and Vichy, and between also Vichy and the Fourth Republic, right? So a lot of historians tend to think about the continuity between the Third Republic and Vichy, but there is not that much work that was being done on after, right? The afterlife of Vichy to some extent, because the French national myth was that of a complete reconstruction, right? But it would be very interesting I think for us to know a little more about this. And actually, I'm going to speak in the name of someone who works a lot with American students who tend to see, the French Republic, the Third Republic, especially as racist, as hypocritical, as unable to live up to its standards, as exclusionary, right? And so republicanism, in a lot of, in the way my students speak about France, is a dirty word, right? Because of, basically it's racism, basically it's intense racism, right? So could you tell us a little more about that, and maybe about how in a way Vichy's racism has fed or not on previous Republican forms of exclusions? That's one thing. The other thing is, you said this also very quickly, and I think it's really worth telling a little more to the audience that might not know exactly the details, but could you tell us a little more about, how important, and you won't say that because you're very modest, but I'm telling you guys that this work is very important in contributing to the debate in France about Vichy, and the idea that we had for a long time that Vichy protected the Jews, right? And that the extermination of Jews in France was actually a little less than in other places, where you have lots of statistics that people have used or that. And then when Professor Paxton, who I hope is here with us today, I'm sure he's here with us today, very, very important book in 1973 showed that actually, no, there was actually a complete local French desire to participate in the extermination of the Jews, right? They didn't need a German pressure to do that. One other thing that emerged is that, yes, maybe, but, they were more xenophobic than anti-Semitic. So the French state gave away the foreign Jews, but not the French Jews. They protected the French Jews. And your work, right, shows that, there was a differential in the sense that actually, that's one of the empirical results of your work, right? That that Jews were targeted primarily in the denaturalization. They lost their citizenship at a much higher rate than any other population during the war. And then so could you tell us a little more how this contributes, right? That so 7,000 Jews among the people who got denaturalized, which is 15,000, 7,000 were Jews, and how that participates in, how that sheds light in a way on the debate on the French responsibility during the Holocaust, right? And then last question about, and you don't have to answer that question because I really would like to open to the public, but the question of methodology, on the question of what you call a statistical ethnography, a quantified ethnography, which is what I said at the beginning, right? How do you do that? Could you, I know how you do that because I've read the book, but for those who have not read the book yet, can you let us know what is behind this idea of doing a multiplicity of macro histories combined together into a larger narrative? I must say that we have tons of great questions. So I'm going to let you, Claire, answer in a few minutes. You can actually drop my questions. That's fine. They're not that important. Please answer Rebecca's question. And then I'm going to read some of the questions in the Q&A to you so that you can answer some of the fascinating questions that are currently in the Q&A.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for your comments. And I feel truly honored by that. And first, just about Rebecca's comment, I feel truly honored that I may be viewed as a member of historian of Jewish historians. This community that I don't know very well, because I never thought of my work as a piece of Jewish history. And in my view, and I totally agree with what you said, Jewish history of Jews is part of a general history, and I don't want to be in a ghetto of Jewish history, if you know what I mean. So I feel honored to be welcome in the community of historians in Jewish history, and thank you so much for this very warm welcome. I think I'm going to ask the questions about the continuity between Vichy and the Republic, because it asks the question of the state administration. The continuity that I show, there is a huge debate, historiographical debate on this question of continuity with the Third Republic and with the Fourth Republic. You're right, Emmanuelle. What I show is that there is really a continuity if you are based on the level of the bureaucrats. The administration state, they are the same people. The reviewer of naturalization, they were working during the Third Republic as giving naturalization. And sometimes I can have the same name of the guy who gave the naturalization from the Ministry of Justice in the 30s, then denaturalized the same guy 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years after. And after the war, they stay in the administration. So there is truly a continuity of the administration. But, and that is important, I don't agree with the idea of continuity of targets, because there is, of course, a huge anti-Semitic campaigns, press campaigns, public opinion campaign in the 30s, but there is no state anti-Semitism during the Third Republic. You cannot say that. There is racism, there is xenophobic, but there is not anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism as a state policy begins with Vichy regime. And that is really important because it's brand new in the history of the French administration to target. Okay, there is some, we can discuss with the colony, because of course with the colony's territory, it's quite different. But I mean, if you see the metropole, that is true. And that leads me to the question raised by Rebecca about the state administration. And that is for me one of the main issue there that I did not expect it when I underwent this, when I did this investigation. But one just simple result, all things being equal, the main criteria for being denaturalized or not is the person of the judge who examined the file. I did not expect at all this result, but I mean, if you put everything, the origin of the people, the country of origin, the profession, the age, I don't know, the person of the judge is the main determining factor of being of not denaturalized. So this shows that there are rooms of maneuvers for people. You spoke of André Mornay, and André Mornay is not the good guy in the story, but there are good guys also in the administration. And I underlined the roles of two judges who did, in their way, an underground resistance by maintaining the nationality almost all the people when they're examining their files. So what is important here is to show how this administration work plays a role, and a compelling role, a crucial role in the implementation of any policy. Of course, I totally agree with this idea of the role of administration. And I think for me, it was very important to think of what it relies on, which criteria. And I have just one story about that, is between the two judges, among the two judges who are very, very resistant in a way. I mean, who did not denaturalize. They have specific careers. Both of them were sons of teachers and not part of the career of traditional judge families as the others. And most interesting, one of them, he followed the classes of one of a Durkheimian sociologist, Célestin Bouclé, at the Sorbonne. While he was judge in Paris, he, while at the Sorbonne, to follow the class of a science sociologist, Célestin Bouclé. And he did, so that was like his frequentation, I don't know if you can say that in English, with social sciences protected him a little bit of being of obeying too much. That gave him a little room of maneuver to resist, but he's not a hero. I mean, let me be honest, he's not a hero. He did not resign. He not went in the. He did not go to the resistance as some others did. But he had a crucial role, because when, by chance, you were examined by him, you had really significant chances to keep your nationality, and that's important.
I just want to interject, because that's exactly what I was asking about, rethinking the categories. So in Vichy France, if a person resigns, that means they're resisting. But he, by staying in his position and thwarting their goals, is actually also resisting. So you're rethinking the whole categories in some ways.
And that is also important. I mean, it's topical for us, because as teachers in France, we are civil servants. And if you think of maybe being in some kind of authoritarian regime, and that could be a possibility now. I can tell you, we are very afraid of that, but I think there is, you know better than us that this is possible. What are you doing as a civil servant? I mean, for me, this is really an intimate question that and so I think this work beyond the historical the history of this specific period has also to shed light on this issue. Maybe I will end here, because if we can hear the question of the audience, of course.
Yes, so we have tons of questions which I have actually read and grouped into categories. I'm going to add them, put the questions to you, Claire. But before we do that, I wanted to know if both of you could go over a little. Can we add 10 minutes to the discussion? Or are you, yeah, everybody's
Okay.
10 minutes. Wonderful. Thank you very much for your generous or your generosity. So among the questions, I would say there are questions that are very factual, and I'm going to ask all of them at the same time, and then they're more kind of analytical or interpretative questions. So among the factual questions is very simply, how many people did lose their French citizenship?
Okay, so that is a simple question, but it's not easy to answer it. But I don't want to elaborate too much. There is a whole part in the book, if you want to read it, about the exact number, because there is no exact numbers, but around, to be an approximative number, is 1,500. 1,500 people.
15,000.
15,000, sorry. 15,000 people who lost their nationality. 15,000, yes, I'm sorry.
So just maybe I'm going to ask all those factual questions once, and then you can answer them, and if some you don't want to answer, you can decide not to answer them. But there were questions about, you know, other groups and the Jews that lost their citizenship. In the book, you learned that 7,000 Jews more or less lost their citizenship, right? So who are the other one? Were there any native born Jews? That is to say, native born French, right? So people who were born with French citizenship, I'm sorry, who lost their citizenship. That was one of the questions. Did everybody got it back after World War II, after 1945? Did people get their citizenship back? And another factual question concerned the possible, I mean, whether there were protests by non-Jews in France, people witnessing, seeing people losing their citizenship, and maybe, you know, writing a letter, protesting in one way or the other against this policy of denaturalization.
Okay, so quick about the other groups, there are tons. There are a lot of nationality. There are Italians, Russians, Greeks, Spaniards. I mean, all the naturalized were subject to be denaturalized. So there were a lot. And about the second question, that is very important. If you look at the main country of the 15,000 denaturalized of birth, the main birth country is France, because they are all the children, and all the children are born in France. So the native born, if you mean born in France, there are a lot. About the native born, meaning they are born French, that is quite different. There is another law, the law of 23rd July 1940, which is exactly on the deprivation of French nationality for native born French, meaning, for example, General de Gaulle lost his nationality because he left France. So, but this is a different law, and I'm not treating at all this law in my book.
So you want to clarify, because people might not know that, you know, if you're born in France, you're not automatically French. So to explain why there is two different laws, right? So in general, it's complicated because it changed a little over time. But in French law since 1889, if you're born in France of parents who themselves were not French at your birth, you are not French automatically, right? So being born in France is not enough. Most of the time, people did acquire French citizenship at age 18. and most of the time they acquired it, I mean, throughout history, automatically at age 18, right? So those are the people that Claire has in mind when she said they were denaturalized, right?
I also just want to say that is normative. Germany is the same. For continental Europe, that is the normative citizenship structure.
Did the third question was about did they got back the nationality? All of them? No, that's interesting. I found in my sample 2 people who were deprived of nationality by the Fourth Republic. But the 2 cases are interesting. There are 2 pro-Germans, and there were too much pro-Germans under the Vichy regime and too much pro-Germans under the Fourth Republic. So the denaturalization were transformed in deprivation. And about the fourth question about protecting, I have my answer would be not unilateral. On the one hand, no. I was astonished by the fact that when the law was issued, no one reacted. I mean, no French Jew, no people said something against the law. So it was very consensual. On the other side, on the level of the people and on the individuals, when they are protesting, the people with the letters that I show, sometimes they joined with their letters a lot of petitions or letters of support of colleagues, neighbors, people saying he's a good French, you cannot denaturalize. So there are some kinds of informal support in the protestation.
Okay, so thank you. There are also questions that are a little more, I would say, wait a second. You've not seen anything yet. Okay, there are questions about anti-Semitism in France. Claire, you said that there was no state anti-Semitism in France before Vichy. What about the Dreyfus affair? Right? How do you interpret the Dreyfus affair in that context? Another question that is also in a way related to this is from someone else is like, maybe it was kind of an interpretation. I don't know if it was an answer to that question, but maybe would you say that the relatively low level of anti-Semitism in France in the Third Republic was actually because of the embarrassment created by the Dreyfus affair? Another set of questions was on one listener was actually noticing specifically the fact that the sense of betrayal that is in your dossier, like, you know, Jews feeling surprised, right? They were not expecting it. They didn't see it coming, was what a listener was writing. They were surprised by this. So in a way, they were not used to, you know, widespread anti-Semitism because they were surprised by this manifestation, right? So is that because there was actually a level of trust among the Jews, or you know, in France? I think for this, and so the last interpretative question, and you actually can do whatever you want with that. There was actually another question about the connection to the Costa Gavras movie, Section Spéciale. Is this something that you can comment on? And then the maybe more interpretive question by the same listener was, how does that even remotely approach the action of the Trump administration? How can you compare the Trump administration and the Vichy state?
Okay.
I will leave you with all these questions for now. And then the last question was about methodology. I see more questions coming. So I'm going to let Claire answer those, and I'm going to look through the next question.
So I did not compare Vichy regime with Trump administration at all. I just say that the deprivation and the denaturalization, deprivation of nationality and denaturalizations occurred now in several states as the United States. I mean, the denaturalizations under Trump administration, they were 600% more during 4 years, so that is not nothing. But they occurred also in India now, and that is a very topical issue in India. They occurred in South Africa. I mean, it's a global phenomenon.
And in France, though, wasn't that the last thing in France with the denaturalization of 5 men?
Of course. I begin my talk with that. So, I mean, it was not at all a matter of comparing Vichy regime with Trump administration, but just saying that this denaturalization issue is now topical and global. Then, about the anti-Semitism, to be specific, I did not say there were a low level of anti-Semitism in the 30s at all. On the contrary, I showed in my work on immigrant shopkeepers how high and terrible was the anti-Semitism against shopkeepers, Jews shopkeepers especially. But what I said is that those press campaigns, and there were a huge campaign against Leo Blum during the Popular Front in 1936 as a Jew, and he was Prime Minister of France. So that is not at all my point. The thing that I said is that when you say there is a continuity between the Third Republic and the Vichy regime, sometimes people say the Third Republic was excluding immigrants, then they just excluded Jews. And I said, immigrants is not exactly the same as Jews, because they have no legal category to exclude Jews under the Third Republic. And what I said is not, there is not, when I say it's not a state anti-Semitism, let me just be again specific. I just want to stand the fact that there is not a legal anti-Semitic policy during the Third Republic. Of course, there is a lot of anti-Semitism inside the political class and the political men and the French army, as the Dreyfus affair shows. But there is not, as under the Vichy regime, a legal anti-Semitic policy. And that is important to distinguish and to be very specific on this different point, because there is a lot of debates on that. And I did not answer your question about denaturalizations as an evidence of protecting French Jews or not. What is important is that for some far-right leaning columnists, denaturalization is seen as an example of the resisting of Marshal Pétain to the Germans. Why? Because, and I did not at all mention this fact during my talk, Pétain refused in August 1943 to sign a bill proposed by the Germans, which would collectively denaturalize all the Jews. He refused to do so. So some people said, you see, he refused because he did want to protect French Jews. What I showed is exactly at the same time, while he was refusing to sign this bill, he was asking the Commission to denaturalize more and more Jews. And this refusal is what I intend to show and to prove in this book. Is this refusal is a way the Vichy regime wants to stand its command on French nationality. He wants to because that is the last part he has, because all the territory is invaded in 1943, and he wants to state his command on French nationality. It's not at all a matter of protecting French Jews, in my point of view. So just to be specific, the legal anti-Semitic policy of Vichy regime, for me, it's not the same as the Dreyfus affair. And I don't know, maybe I forgot one question. I don't know, Emmanuelle.
Yeah, no, the feeling of betrayal.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, that is fascinating for me to try to approach, and thank you, Rebecca, for having mentioned that my main, my attempt is also to give voices to the people who are not there anymore to testify. And I think that is also some kind of issue now, that a lot of witnesses of that time are not there anymore, and for biographical reasons they won't be there anymore to testify. So there is an issue there to try to understand how people and Jews at this time reacted to the different measures. And what is important is not to put the end of the story at the beginning, and to be in the mind of the people in 1940. No one in 1940 can know the end of the story. And of course, now you know the end of the story, and the end of the story is so terrible, so awful, so unimaginable that it makes you feel that they were insane to declare themselves as Jews to the administration, for example, because don't forget that what they did, they got to declare themselves to the French state as Jews when the French state has to do a census of Jews. So, I mean, this, they truly believe in the state, at least in 1940, 1941. But then, and you can observe it with quantification, and that is kind of answers to you, Emmanuelle. For example, if you quantify the amount of protests, they are very high in 1941, and then they are decreasing continuously because people understood that it was endless. I mean, they did not have any chance to get success with their protests. So that is also a way to approach that this, the distrust, the distrust and the increasing distrust with concerning the state.
And I just want to interject before we end. That's a larger part of Jewish history from Salo Baron, how Jews are very invested in the modern nation state as seeing as their salvation because they will get citizenship. And your book actually shows within 5 years how they realize, right, like what George Soros said, is modern nation states good for Jews? That's a question. In 1940, they would say yes, but I think that that's one of the power of your book, because you show how people realize what something they had seen that they trusted so much, how quickly it could change using the same tools. That's what I would say to everyone. The power of the book is it uses laws and judges and petitions, everything that a state does with rule of law to totally invert what everyone thought a state would do for them. So.
Yeah, she said that better than me. Thank you, Rebecca.
You say it better in French. I say it better in English. How's that sound?
Thank you so much.
So thank you very much. If anyone has a connection to George Soros, please send the book. We will be happy to send you a free copy of the book that you can forward to George Soros. I know Claire is involved in a huge project, international project of, again, a quantitative macro history. I don't know how to put this together, but like, looking at a lot of individuals' trajectory together at the same time. So that is, requires a lot of means. And so again, if you know George, please send him the book. And I would like to thank everybody here. First of all, I would like to thank Claire for a wonderful book. I would say actually a wonderful work. If someone also wants to translate the book on 991, I'm sorry, Face à la persécution, 991 Jews in the war. Another wonderful book that in a way deploys the same kind of statistical ethnography, as Claire was saying, so if you want to discover more of Claire's work, it doesn't stop with Denaturalized. There are other things you can read. And so thank you, Claire, for your work in general, for your book in particular. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for your comments, very enlightening and wise comment. Thank you very much to the audience for great questions. I hope I was not betraying anyone or ignoring anyone. Thank you very much to Shani Peer and Fanny Gay for their incredible organization, for making this possible. And I would like to say that this event was recorded and will be posted on the Maison Française website if anyone wants to see it in the future. So thank you very much to all. Thank you for spending a little more time, and congratulations to Claire.
And thank you for the audience also. And I'm really sorry not being able to be with you today. Trust me.
We love you. We love you again in New York soon.
Yes.
Okay.
That's possible.
I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. And thank you, Emmanuelle, Rebecca, Shani. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye.